to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
Miller sent me a video where this Satanist prayed to Satan and asked for him to reveal himself so he could picture what he looks like. And so in a dark room, he got out all of his, he's an artist, got out all of his paints, and turned the lights off, put the blinds up, and just started painting. And then what came out was this really pretty picture of this blue person. It looks exactly like the people in Avatar. So that's what the devil looks like.
Oh, man. It's probably a Christian going undercover to try to
that'd be so
dissuade
funny.
people from Avatar, because that's devil magic.
That's the devil magic. Did you just not see? Did you not see?
Okay, there is something funny about the whole Avatar thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like possession. I mean, it's in essence.
That's true. Yeah.
No, it's not like intended. Well, I don't think it's intended to be that. But like,
No.
there is something where you're like, because the tribal people are like, what's this? What do they say? Not demonic, but like
I forget.
in the first one. But they're like, what is this?
Yeah, they see it as like a magic or something. Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, let's go over to the PCC. Let's step on over Pierce's Culture Corner. Get seated, get comfortable. I got another update for you. Earlier this month, talked about actually seeing Avatar and all that fun stuff. And today, I mentioned this last semester before it came out, but I beat the new God of War game. I also need to be clear whenever I mention things like books or movies, me mentioning them isn't an endorsement for everything about them. I just want to be 100% clear.
It's a pretty intense
as
game.
a podcast. Yeah, it's a very intense game. It's also different playing this one versus other games I've played in the past, because I couldn't, like, the first God of War game, Hannah was pregnant with Riley, I believe, when we played that. Now, like, Riley's very aware of her surroundings. I'm not going to play this game in front of her.
Not
But
suitable for a toddler?
no, not suitable for a
You
toddler.
played it in front of her when she was in Hannah's tummy.
That's true. She did hear a lot of the grunting and yelling and a lot of the people dying. She heard that, but she didn't visualize it, so it's not as bad, moral standard and all that.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, there was one scene that I was playing. I was like, I think I'm just going to go through this forest and it should be fine. And then this guy jumps out and I was like, well, nope, it's not going to be fine. So I had to like immediately turn it off. But anyway, beat the game. So culturally speaking, huge game for last year, but it also came out the same year as another game called Elden Ring, which ended up beating it out as far as Game of the Year is concerned. They kind of went back and forth on a lot of awards between the two of those games. Those are the big winners. Everybody had their eyes on those games, and it makes sense why Elden Ring won. But just to be clear in regards to culture, like God of War is a very close second. You have this following where people are like, why didn't they get it? And what's crazy is that God of War is such a narrative-driven game. These last two have been so narrative-driven, and there's very key themes throughout the entirety of it. Even on the side missions, they're really pushing these themes. And I wrote down a few of them. A lot of them have to do with his father-son relationship with his son, in which he redeemed in the first game, and now you get to see that come to fruition. And what does a relationship between a quote unquote healthy relationship look like between a father and the son, where trust is being learned to be built, where the son is growing up and taking on more responsibility as an adult? What does that look like? And I thought they did a great job with pushing that further and not introducing conflict that doesn't need to be there, but actually showing what a healthy relationship can look like. And in the midst of that healthy relationship, they're relying on one another and realizing that vulnerability in itself isn't wrong if it can be, what does he say earlier? Requiring others is not in itself a weakness. And I love that aspect. And then also there's this thought process that he's trying his best not to hold on to the past and let the past define him. And his son is now coming alongside him and encouraging him in that and saying, it's not who you are. Like, you didn't do what you just did. There's a part in the game where he has to fight somebody that he did not want to fight. And his son comes alongside of him and says, hey, you didn't do what you just did based off of the monster that you used to think you were. You did that based off necessity of protection of where we are now. Don't allow that mentality of the past to define you, but remember who you are now. And there's even these other people that come in, like Thor gets to a point where he looks the main character Kratos in the eyes and he said, "You're a destroyer like me and you'll be nothing else." And so he's having to fight not only his own self-worth from his own past, but now realizing what other people are saying and realizing that he can grow from that. Now his son is coming alongside him and saying, "You can grow from that. You taught me to be better than that." There's even a point where Kratos breaks down and he's like borderline crying. And he goes, "I'm so sorry, Atreus." And his son looks at him and goes, "Don't be sorry. Be better," which is a line from the first movie. And so he stops crying and laughs and they put their arm around each other.
Movie?
Sorry, the first game.
Oh.
From the first game of this series.
Are you talking about a game or a
Sorry,
movie?
my bad. For the first movie.
It sounds like you're describing the movie too.
I know it's so narrative driven. Yeah. And then the character laughs because he got told what he taught his son. And so they put their arm around each other and they go to the next part of the game.
Oh, Dad.
I know, right? And, part of me though, like, since there's so much of this thrust of don't let the past define you, you can be better. Don't let the past define you, you can grow. It doesn't necessarily seem as prevalent, but I know it is in people's mindset of cancel culture, of how people cannot grow from their past. People cannot learn from their past. Whatever they tweeted in 2009 is who they are today. Whatever movie you said you liked that had some racist slurs, you are a racist. And so they're saying things from, that's a whole nother story about Breakfast at Tiffany's that I saw from another meme. But I can say it on another culture corner because I can do this here. But since this is such a culturally prevalent game, I hope that this can speak into the weakness and demise of what cancel culture is. And personally, hopefully people can seek out that things can be better. And ultimately, I mean, obviously my goal is the gospel, that that this can be an illustration of the love of God. This can be an illustration of forgiveness, of pushing past yourself and being strengthened from something outside of yourself. Being vulnerable in itself isn't bad or wrong.
Oh, it was you this time.
There we go.
I waited.
We should trade back and forth. And guess who really enjoyed the Dr. Pepper today?
That all that story and narrative makes me think back in the day when Micah and I used to play Tiger Woods golf, and you'd be on Pebble Beach, and wait, there was no narrative.
It'd be so funny. The characters sit beside each other. Like, listen, this shot doesn't define you.
This is gonna go bad real quick. You're gonna have all these kids running on the course to Tiger Woods, Dad, and he's like, "I didn't know it was Dad."
Oh man! Now there's gonna be like a PC mod where you make Kratos Tiger Woods.
Tiger Woods, that was a fun game though.
It was, man. We played it a lot.
Part of me wants to get it now for. I don't even know what my kids have. Xbox.
I just bought it for our PlayStation, but I haven't had a chance to play it. So.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
You have to come play.
You should have a Tiger Woods.
That might be a game I could actually play.
There you go.
Because I get motion sick with it.
Yeah,
There's no way. I would love to play some of those other games, but I can't.
Dude. Oh, that's another thing I need to do. Talk about God of War also really pushed forward. The second one, God of War Ragnarok, really pushed forward accessibility in video games, and so they helped people with certain things like motion sickness and certain color blindness. So you can edit the game.
How do you play the game with your motion sick?
Oh, it's crazy. I'll go through. We can talk about it later. I've gone over on this, but they've done a lot of accessibility type things to have more people be able to enjoy it instead of just people who only see a certain way or interact a certain way. So it's interesting. Yeah, I know, right? I think it's interesting to open the door even wider. Like, hey, come play. Like, we want to play. I played
Space Pirates on Oculus, and that didn't make me sick. And I was shocked because it was fun to actually get to engage in something everybody else gets to do that I normally can't.
Yeah.
I think I could play it for a long time.
Ryan, what are we talking about today, man?
Pierce, today we are going to talk about marriage from a biblical perspective.
But Ryan, didn't we already do that?
Well, actually, Pierce, we did 105 episodes ago, 106 episodes ago. It was our very first episode in May 2020. And so almost 3 years ago, we have had it back on our list for more than a year that we would like to readdress it. And so that is what we're going to do today.
Marriage. That's what brings us together today.
I don't know that we will say a lot of things differently than we did in the first episode. Probably better. We'll probably say it more clearly, or I won't. But then Micah will fix it for me, and so I am never going to be more clear. Wow. Never mind. I had a thought. I'm not going to follow that up. But what we would say is that marriage and was it the last podcast that you talked about marriage and sexual relationship and stuff like that? It's a picture of the gospel. And so So earthly marriage is a temporary thing, and it is brought to an end either by the death of one of the parties in the marriage covenant, or it is brought to an end ultimately by the return of Christ. Because we know that in heaven we are neither married nor given in marriage, that this relationship, marriage, carries more weight than does any other relationship, friendships, and even children. I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think a lot of people put more time into their children than they do their marriage, which is why a lot of empty nesters then get divorced because they are living with a stranger. But anyway, God created the covenant of marriage in Genesis 1, and he created it to ultimately image him in the earth. So he created Adam and Eve in his image and his likeness. And it's super interesting because he said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness. And so this is going to be stupid. We didn't have to say this 3 years ago, I don't feel like, but men and women are different. And
what?
I know, like,
wow.
Like people today go, no, we're not different. And like, yeah.
Like people say that?
Yeah, all the time. Like the men and women are the same. Like, and it's like,
did they not see Kindergarten Cop?
No, it's stupid. Like it's so stupid. Like there was
I just shared that clip specifically now.
So
I bet a lot of people haven't seen Kindergarten Cop, but now they have. Now they have to see it. Yeah,
but it's like I was seeing a deal about the women's soccer the other day, and it was saying that the U.S. men's team share of the World Cup was $400 million, and that the women's team their share of their purse or whatever it was $30 million, $30 million to $400 million. And it was saying that because of what they've done now in football, soccer, is that the women get a portion of the men's purse so that all the salaries can be equal because it's all equal. And I'm like, here's how we know it's not equal. Yes. The men's soccer association, like the whole World Cup, brought over $6 billion in revenue in, like over $6 billion in revenue.
The one they just had?
Yeah.
And that was with Qatar saying in the end deciding they were not going to have any alcohol sales in their country. They originally had said they're going to allow that because in Muslim culture, then they said no. So that's that revenue without the alcohol sales.
Alcohol. So $6 billion in revenue. And then the women's soccer club, it's not equal. Like it's not equal. There was a woman who goes to our church the other day, and we were visiting, and a lady's husband had asked me to go play basketball with them, and I was like, man, you don't want me to play basketball. I was like, I'm not athletic in that way. I'm not a good basketball player. I said, people think that because I'm tall and I have long arms that I'm a good basketball player. Well, it was a Bible study that we were having, and another woman chimes in and she goes, I played basketball in high school, and looking at you, I knew you've never played.
And she could smoke you in basketball.
Oh, yeah. And so I said something about, well, when we have the new building, we'll have a basketball court out there. And she goes, oh, well, we'll have to play. And I was like, no, you would kill me. Yeah. And she goes, no, you're really tall. You're a lot taller than me. She goes, you could stand in front of me and put your arms over me and I wouldn't be able to shoot. And I was like, and you would dribble right around me. And and I was like, I know my limits, right? But people are different. Like the musculature is different.
That's, I think, what they don't want to talk about in this. Because when you say it's not equal, you're not talking about the value
of a human life.
The woman playing soccer and the man playing soccer.
No.
What you're saying is they're two different people.
Yeah.
Like they did when I was in high school, the U.S. women's soccer team at the time played like a state championship high school boys soccer team.
Yeah.
And lost to the boys soccer team, even though they were more talented, more skilled, had better like overall experience. The boys were just stronger and faster.
Right.
It wasn't,
and you couldn't compete with it.
So it's not one's less or one's better.
Right.
It's two different things.
So the point being, right, is that when God said, let us make mankind in our image, he made them male and female.
Yeah.
And
distinctive,
very different. So it's not saying that the masculine side of humanity is the whole image of God, or that the feminine side of humanity is the whole image of God. It is that the masculine and the feminine together create this picture of the image of God, who God is. And so he brings
male and female. He created.
Yeah.
them. in his image.
And so he created male and female in his image, so together they would be a picture. So that, and then the very first instruction he gives Adam and Eve is fill the earth and subdue it. And a lot of people have taken that to be progeny. And I do think that there's probably some, you know,
it has to happen.
Yeah, that has to happen. but right before that, he said, let us make mankind in our image. And then he makes them. And then he says, now go and subdue the earth and fill it. And I think he is primarily concerned with his image being multiplied in the earth.
Fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Probably my image rather than just go fill the earth.
Yeah, then have a whole bunch of babies. And so this husband and wife together, prior to the fall, prior to sin, were fashioned together by God for the purpose of making himself known and then ultimately making the gospel of Jesus Christ known.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't...
Or maybe more clear in Genesis, to be a reflection of who God is.
Yes, okay.
You know what I mean? Because I think
instead of image.
Well, no. I think make him known would imply that like there's a whole bunch of people on the earth at that time that need to see the image of God.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So it's a, while we say that now,
no, you're right.
There's a sense where it's literally just meant to be a reflection of who God is.
Of who he is, like to demonstrate his character.
An image of him, yeah.
And so, yeah, that's good. And so for Christian people to enter into a marriage covenant with any lower view of marriage than that, automatically sets you in a problematic place.
Yeah, because the premise is wrong.
Yeah, because if that's not the standard, here's another thing that our culture has a problem with. There is such a thing as absolute truth, and you shouldn't even have to preface it with absolute because truth by nature is absolute. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as subjective truth.
I love it when people say there's no absolute truth. Like you make a statement of absolute truth by negating.
Yeah. Yeah. So truth does not
they have
need
definitely not watched kindergarten.
No. Truth does not need a modifier.
No.
Because truth is truth.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that is not, if you do not understand the purpose for which God designed marriage, then by default, you must adopt some other standard of marriage. And you're either going to adopt your parents' standard of marriage or a cultural standard of marriage or a watered down Christian view of marriage. Mm-hmm. But if it's not the standard of the purpose of marriage is to represent God and the gospel, anything less than that automatically sets you at a disadvantage.
Maybe to simplify it, it's either your marriage is either about God or it's about you.
Yes. Yeah. But I think I agree with that 100%. I think that some people would go, well, no, like we have a Christian marriage.
Right.
But,
I think that's the point.
Yeah.
I think like when you're breaking it down, like if you're doing, you've told me about times and you've done counseling where you're trying to get them to the point where they understand that they haven't been loving each other through the lens of who they are in Christ.
Right.
And ultimately what you're doing is you're bringing them to a place where they realize that they have been the center.
Right.
So like, even if you have a marriage where people will say like, well, we do all these Christian things, but the gospel, like the goal's not Ephesians 5, where Jesus is represented in his relationship with the church and the marriage, or Genesis when man and woman come together to be an image of who God is and to multiply that image. That's not the premise. The only other place to go is us.
Self. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's like, people can mask it.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm doing all these Christian things, but in reality, and maybe this is probably what people want to know about maybe in this episode, is like, there is so much tension in marriages amongst Christians.
Yes.
And I think people in that position, like, they ask us and they want to know, like, how do we remedy that?
Yeah.
And I think what they're always looking for us to say or to give answers in is like, well, here's a list of things you can do to make that better. And what we always end up coming back to is, well, what's the intention of your marriage? Like, what's your heart in this? What's the purpose of this? Because if it's not to reflect the character or the image of God, if it's not to represent the relationship between Jesus and the body of Christ, the church, then there's nothing we can give you.
Yeah.
Now, if the premise, I'll say this, if you come back to a place, like if someone sits down counseling and they come to a place where they say, yes, we're going to start this now. We recognize this marriage has been about us and not about Jesus. And we're ready to shift and change and let the premise be Jesus. I think there's steps now you can take.
Yeah.
As marriage.
For sure.
But until you get to that point, there's nowhere to go. So it's funny because all these people are asking questions. How can we make this better? And we're like, well, is it about Jesus? And they're like, screw you. That's not what we want to talk about. And I'm like, you're like, let me help you through this. And I'm like, screw you for even asking, you know, like.
Well, if we go back to a couple of weeks ago, the way we think about something impacts how we do it, right?
Yeah.
So if we think about marriage from a poor perspective, then it's going to shape that.
Produce a poor marriage.
Yeah.
And you can have like these inklings of great things. Like
sure.
I heard someone recently tell me, and it's interesting because I think there's legitimacy to it in what they were saying, but it's like it's like a glimpse of what it could be. They talked about the situation where they were on a date with their wife and they had done these things that were like, they were helping out some people and ended up by chance just helping this person out. And then he was like, man, I gotta be honest, some of the best sex I've ever had was after that date. And there is some legitimacy to that because I think you're engaging in that moment.
Married couple.
As a married couple.
Yeah, I think you said that.
You're engaging in what probably to some degree God's intention was. So you're getting a glimpse of what it could be. But it's funny, we hold on to those things. Like if I could just replicate that instead of saying, I need to change my heart.
Right.
And what the purpose of this marriage is, and then watch how it begins to change. Right. How I interact with my husband and my wife.
Well, if what am I, 6 years older than you, Micah? But I remember growing up in church and very much having a sense in the churches I went to that there was a place for the women to do things and there was a place for the men to do things. And this is a way a woman could minister in the church. And here's a way that a man could minister in the church. I'm not even talking staff roles. I'm talking about if there's a buffet, what do you call it? Not a buffet. Thank you. If there's a potluck, then the women have to do that. Unless it's burgers, then you're going to have the men come in and you know what I mean? By like you have these kind of these roles,
stereotypes.
Yeah, and the men are going to be the bus drivers and all this kind of stuff. And I think that what people do is like how many people say, "Oh man, when I wish it was like the good old days," where people say our grandparents never got divorced. And what people fail to acknowledge, right, is that there was this stereotypical kind of thing that the woman's going to stay at home and she shouldn't work, and that she's going to have dinner on the table. I'm the cook in our home. Like I'm the one who cooks. Michelle has learned to cook some things and she does a really great job at it, but I enjoy it and I'm the one who normally will do that. But like there were all these things that like a woman has to do this. The husband's going to leave in the morning. When he comes home, have his scotch and his cigar ready or whatever the thing was, you know?
Sounds dope.
He's going to sit there.
When can we sign up for that?
Wait a minute.
And so
I don't know about this one.
But people would be like, and their marriage worked, and he was a hard man. People, it's so funny how many people will talk about their dads and be like, man, my dad was a hard man, and you couldn't please him, but that's just the way it was back then, you know, and we're soft now. And all this stuff. Here's the reality. Your grandmother probably would have left him. There just wasn't an opportunity for that to happen in the world she lived in. Yeah. She didn't have the education. She didn't have a job. There wasn't any financial way that she...
Okay, can we... Yes. Here's what I think.
Well,
I think that
one thought.
Okay.
My point is we romanticize those things and make them a model for marriage.
I don't think we romanticize it.
Okay.
I think we'd use it as justification.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think
that we're slightly better than that?
Or we use it as justification to either say like, here's why I'm doing the things in marriage I'm doing the way I am. Like a husband, my granddad was a hard man and look, they didn't get divorced.
Yeah.
I'm gonna continue down this path.
Gotcha.
Tell my wife, you're stupid and you're worthless and you need to just do these certain things and be happy. And I think it's a justification. I don't think we romanticize it. I think we don't know where to go.
Gotcha.
We don't have any other option. And I also don't think she would have left the wife. I think that assumes that divorce is the sign that marriage sucks.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who stay in marriage and it sucks.
Yeah.
And so I think that she was already probably unhappy, and that marriage, if they were believers, was not reflecting the intention God had for marriage in the first place. So I don't think it's romanticizing. I don't think it's like we want to be there. I think it's a justification because we don't know what the hell we're supposed to be doing in marriage.
Yeah.
And so it's easier for us to say, man, you know what? Wouldn't it have been nice back in the day? That makes me feel better. You know, I think it's still the me-centered thing.
Oh, for sure.
Like that's what's frustrating for me. Is that there's been so many years of bad counseling for people in marriage from pastors saying, well, you just need to learn how to interact with, like, your marriage is going to suck. You just need to learn how to interact with each other, learn how to fight well. There's people who taught my dad, like, well, when you have a fight, make sure you have sex afterwards so you can make up. And then, like, if that's how you want to do it, then do it that way.
It's going to be really crappy.
Yeah.
But that's not with the goal of Jesus at this. Now, I'll say this. If your goal is Jesus and you have tension in a conversation, and at the end of that tension, you are like, you know what? Let's spend some time in intimacy together, whether that ends up in sex or not. I don't mind that as a pattern if the goal is Jesus. But don't assume for a moment having sex after you have a fight as a married couple is going to all of a sudden make that go away. Probably what you're doing as a husband is like instilling bitterness in your wife, where now she assumes that sex only has to do with tension.
Yeah.
Whether she knows it or not, you're creating these bad assumptions, bad correlations. With it.
You are.
So that's what's so frustrating for me is all these bad counselors through the years for Christian marriages. You teach them not to have sex when they're kids, and then they get married and they're supposed to have this amazing sex, but you don't tell them what sex is about. And then when they fight, you're like, you just got to learn how to deal with it well. Yeah. Don't carry that to Sundays though. Like, don't show up at church and act like things are okay. And honestly, I don't even fault a lot of the couples. I just want to go up to the pastors and kick them.
Yeah,
I want to rip those things off and be like, you shouldn't be counseling people in marriage.
The reality is, like, teaching and learning comes from cultural forces, right? And so we live in a cultural environment now where you can devour 30-second clips and 30-second videos and feel like after 10 minutes, you've devoured 20 videos on Christian marriage, you feel like you're educated. And we're getting these little kind of nuggets. And so to your point, like, are individual Christians responsible for maturing and growing in Christ? Sure, but we have been trained to default to the leaders and so if all the leaders are giving crappy advice about marriage, like we three sitting at this table believe that marriage can every day be a blessing. We believe that. And I think that we have felt it in our marriage, in our three marriages, not marriage, because it's not like a weird thing.
There's a documentary coming now.
Right. I had a rough day a few weeks ago, and I was just exhausted, and I was just kind of done with people, and I need some space by myself. And so Michelle had kind of known that it had been a frustrating day for me the day before, and then that day was also frustrating, and it wasn't directed towards her or the boys, but I was just tired, and so they were going to go hang out with her family for a little bit. And I was like, I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to get a workout in and go for a run and stay home, try to burn off some of this frustration. And I found myself, because they were gone for a few hours, I found myself later, like, kind of frustrated that she didn't text to check on me. And like,
I really need to be alone right now.
And make sure you check on me.
Talk to me, okay?
And I knew that was just because I was in a bad headspace. But I also didn't want to like let that develop. So like when she got home, I was like, okay, so listen, I am not upset with you at all, but I need to tell you where I'm at today. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was like, no. Yeah. I told you I need some time I just need some quiet. And in your mind, you're thinking, yeah, I love my husband. I'm going to let him have some quiet because I know he's had a hard few days. And I was like, but literally, you're the only person who matters to me. And I was like, so I also need you to go, hey, you good? And she goes, yeah, but I thought you wouldn't want to talk about it. I was like, right. And then I can say, I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it right now.
Just throw in that step in the middle. Give me some comfort, please.
I was like, I just need to know that, I'm not okay today. Like I need to know that. And we kind of laughed about it because it's so stupid.
Yeah.
But those are the types of things that I think can breed.
Well, to my point I've made to you about you and Michelle a lot is, I bet in 99% of relationships, not just marriages, that would cause tension.
Yeah.
Because of y'all's personalities, that tension is not there.
Yeah.
So you put that in with other personalities.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where like, I think people struggle because they're like, Ryan, I hear you talk about your relationship with your wife and mine's not that way. And they assume that means that they suck.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, oh, they're different people. They approach life differently. They approach conversations and relationships differently. And so I think I'm at a place now, maybe this is something that has changed since our last conversation, where I think the goal is to do Ephesians 5. Represent the relationship with Jesus and the church.
Right.
I don't think that means that there's a certain personification of what a husband looks like and what a wife looks like.
Yeah.
To your point earlier, I don't think it means that there's a stereotype you follow.
Right.
I don't think it means a wife always cooks.
Right.
Although I'm glad that my wife does, because if it was just me, we'd literally eat hamburgers and sausages and grilled cheese and eggs all the like. You know what I mean?
Those
But there's no like there's no like personification in the text. Is my point.
No. Yeah.
And I think that another aspect is not just roles, but also personality tendencies.
Right.
There's no personification that if someone hears me talk about marriage, they're going to automatically assume what I'm telling husbands is have a strong personality.
Right.
And I'm not saying that that's just me.
Right.
I know wives who have stronger personalities than their husbands. I'm not telling them they're wrong for having a stronger personality. I think that's one of the things that's changed since our last conversation is I don't want anybody to ever have this idea that there's a personification of what a husband looks like and a wife looks like. The only thing that's in the text is that a husband and wife reflect the relationship that Jesus has with the church. And
husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church.
And here's what I think happens is when wives submit to their husbands as to the Lord, and when wives love their husbands love their wives as Christ loved the church, then no matter what your personality type is, no matter what your quote unquote stereotypical role is in the marriage, your marriage will accomplish the goal.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's shifted, is there's no sense of like, here's what I mean. I think I'm done giving people examples of what situational marriage looks like.
Okay.
Because I think people get the wrong idea.
Well, it's like the book that Pierce mentioned where he said, you're like, hey, be less busy. You don't have to do it my way. And then he spends the rest of the book saying, here's my way.
Yeah.
Could we share anecdotal stories
Yeah.
that are available so that if someone shares our personality tendencies, they can go, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
How I could deal with it in this situation, but not as an example of marriage.
Yeah. Not an example of that it needs to be done this way or whatever.
I think we've both done this where we say, we give a marriage point and then we give an example of our particular marriage. And what we've just done unknowingly is we've set ourselves up as the standard of what marriage is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And now everybody else feels like a failure.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's the case. I think that, well, we'll put it this way. If the standard of marriage was don't have tension,
right,
I could never, ever, ever be successful in any marriage I had with anybody.
Yeah.
People will always feel tension with me.
Yeah.
Period. Like just the nature of, I can try my best to not be as strong of a personality, and there's going to be a point where I'm going to say something and people are going to go, I feel like I'm worthless or something. You know, I can't.
So let's call Cammie. We'll bring her in on the conversation.
And so that's what I mean is like, I don't want to set up those standards. I want to just say the goal is Ephesians 5.
Right.
That's it. And then we can talk about the nuances within your marriage and what that looks. How are you accomplishing that goal as an individual with these with your tendencies?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I just don't want people to have the wrong idea.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. I'm thinking of 1 Samuel, maybe 25, and I'm thinking of Abigail and her husband, whose name means fool. I can't think of his name. Starts with an N, I think. And David is sending his men to go kill this guy.
Oh, yeah.
And Abigail intervenes, and she exercises wisdom, and she exercises spiritual wisdom as well, and says, look, you don't raise your hand against this man, because then you become like him and all this kind of stuff. And then she ends up married to David, right? But we would look at that marriage and go, if there's a pattern, then we would say she's in a role she shouldn't be in.
That's fair. Yeah.
And then David comes and kills all of them. You know what I mean? And so we're
not going to follow the pattern all the way out.
Yeah. She's exercising wisdom.
If you meet a couple and the wife's dope and godly and the husband sucks, what do? You kill the husband and you marry that.
That's right. Yeah.
No, but God killed the husband. Yeah. The dude just died.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. But so that's interesting because I think what we could do is talk about how, because I would agree that there's probably tension in every marriage, tension in and of itself, not sinful, not problematic.
No, we're not talking about arguments and yelling and screaming at each other. We're just talking about
I would even come further back from that, because an argument in its purest sense is a discussion from two different viewpoints.
I guess we should. Yeah, it's a great point. We should be specific. Any kind of like anything done out of like hate towards each other.
Yeah, if there is something done that is seeking to make little light of them and make more of you, that's problematic.
Yeah,
because to your point, Pierce, you used to say, because I would say Michelle and I don't raise our voices and yell at each other. You're half deaf. And
what?
Yeah. I almost said
you're half deaf.
But also, like, you and your wife and your sense of humor with each other, you guys like will yell at each other and do different stuff. And so can someone say something in a calm, collected voice that is incredibly hurtful?
Absolutely.
Yes. So none of those things can be the standard. It has to be, is what we're doing here moving us towards a representation of Christ, or is what we're doing here moving us away from a representation of Christ?
Yeah.
And I think you're right, Mike. I think that the tendency is to take cultural norms and make them standards rather than to what we should do maybe is give 3 or 4 different representations. Like just because you're not going to be able to paint the full spectrum for people, but I think that probably most people don't acknowledge the spectrum at all.
Yeah.
And it's polarizing. It's and so it's either this or this. And so here's the spectrum.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Michelle the other day, and I just asked her, and I was like, am I just a contrary person? And of course, Michelle is full of grace, and she was like, I don't think so. And I'm like, yeah, but I need you to like really think about this and not just think from sweet Michelle, like, am I a contrary person? And she goes, what do you mean? And I was like, I tend to, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, I'm like, and I'm not as good at it as you, Micah. I can't see the end from the beginning like you seem to a lot of times. But for example, my boys said, hey, we want to start a podcast. And I was like, great. I can ask some questions to Pierce about some things that we need to do. But here are some basic ideas that, having done a podcast for almost 3 years, I have some thoughts on. And here's what we should do. And they had a very narrow field of what they wanted the podcast to be about. And I was like, man, that's going to be interesting to like you guys and your aunts and uncles who want to hear your podcast. And that's about it. So I said, what's your goal? And they said, we want a big podcast. And I was like, great. So we need to rethink this. And I was giving them some ideas. What they took that as is I was shutting them down.
You're wrong. Yeah.
And my aim was not to be contrary. My aim was to be helpful.
Yeah.
And it dawns on me that a lot of times when people are coming to me and they're saying, well, my marriage sucks, then I'm going, look, here are the things we need to fix. And maybe that's not bad. I don't know that that's bad to do that. Like, I don't know that, like, Micah, if I said something to you and you didn't just come back with me with, well, I disagree with that completely. If you started like placating me and like, look, Ryan, I think you're a nice guy. I've known you for a long time. I think you think really, like, that would tick me off. I don't know if you remember this. Like,
well, yeah, because if I did that, that's bad.
Yeah.
Like, it's real bad.
Well, I don't know if you remember this from like a year ago. I can't remember exactly what God was doing in your life, but there was something in your life where you're like, I feel that I need to make some changes and I need to be more aware of the types of people that I'm dealing with in conversations. Yeah. And one of the things you said to me is, Ryan, with your background, would it be helpful for you if I softened my approach with you? And I said, you better not.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, for one, I know better. I know the scripture. I know truth. Like, you better not, because that would offend me. If you as my friend, if I thought that your belief about me was that I was so tender you had to handle me with kid gloves, I would hate that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just knock my teeth out.
Right.
That's what I want from you. Right. And so, like, I don't think it's bad to just automatically go. So like, Riker, his buddies are really into trading different sports cards right now. And I had no idea. It just boggles my brain that people would do this.
We know a guy that does breaks.
It's true.
Get those kids in on that.
Yeah.
It's not legal, but
they could watch and enjoy it though.
That's true.
Yeah. But it's interesting because like Patrick Mahomes' card sold in October for $4.3 million.
That's dope.
It's a card.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, whoa. And the dude that bought it for $4,000. and then turned around and auctioned it off, and it auctioned for
Pretty
4.3
dope
million.
return.
Yeah. And so Riker is kind of getting into cards, and he was like, man, I'd like this card or that card. And he was like, oh, and so last night I'm cooking dinner, and I'm like, okay, I said, what's your goal? I said, what do you want? And he goes, I want to collect cards. I was like, great, let's go to Walmart, or let's get on Amazon and find a set. And he goes, no. He goes, like, I want a nice card. I was like, okay, this is what I'm trying to figure out. Like, do you want to spend $150 on 10 packs of cards, or do you want to spend $150 on one card? What's the goal?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I'm getting way off topic now. Sorry. But what he heard me say is, because his first thought was,
cards.
yeah. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be contrary. I'm trying to get to the heart of what you want so we can make it happen.
So can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've gotten better every time at like figuring that out?
No, I feel like I suck at all of it.
Because I think that's actually what you're describing is probably actually what people need to hear about marriage.
Yeah.
Like your heart was correct, but what you conveyed was
good
like
point.
something that was not helpful or beneficial to them
in
at
that
all.
moment.
So it didn't mean you were wrong. What it meant is you needed to change your approach for the next time. You know what I mean? Your heart's right.
Yeah. In the
And I think that's
packaging
where
of it.
people miss it. Like there's growth that happens in marriage, but not growth that happens in marriage apart from the goal of representing the relationship
Jesus.
between us and the church.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I feel like every relationship, marriage or not, you're going to be able to have that opportunity to go, okay, this is what I said. This is how it was perceived and received. And that wasn't my intention. So is it just situational? Like, did they just have a bad day and it was,
Right.
or was it that I need to learn how to rephrase that in a different way? And I think for most of us, I'm putting me even at the top of the list, I think that growth is really hard and slow and grinding.
Yeah.
But as you continue to do that, I think what is conveyed to most people is that your heart is still for them.
Yeah.
When you begin to your point earlier, Ryan, belittle and make the other people feel worthless, that's when you're going to find tension that is long lasting and creates bitterness. But just because you said it wrong, doesn't mean you have an awful marriage.
Yeah.
It means you might need to change it and grow next time. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I feel like this is what I was trying to be conscious of, what I was telling you however long ago about interacting with different personality tendencies. I've learned that because I have such strong personality, there are certain personality types that receive me a little bit more harshly than
Sure.
others. And so if I can be aware of that sooner, then I can learn how to interact differently. And I still don't think I'm very good at it. I think it's something I'm pursuing. I think Cammie is the same personality type as you, Pierce, and my brother. And it's actually really helpful for me to have friends like you and my brother, because now I can learn a little bit better of how to convey things to my wife. Because I know that the Enneagram 9s, your goal is to be a peacemaker, right? And that is the antithesis of everything that's in my personality. And so most of the time it's going to be perceived as me trying to downplay your tendencies.
Break the peace.
Right. Because exactly. Because my goal is never peace. My goal is truth. My goal is what's right. And so that's what I mean is I think people get in this rut in marriage because they're like, how do I not have the tension, versus saying the goal is Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand that at times there's tension. So how do I remedy that tension with the goal of getting to a place where we represent Jesus better?
Yeah.
I think people are so intent on not having the tension rather than saying, how do I grow from the tension and get better as a husband and get better as a wife in representing Jesus or the church in this relationship?
Well, it goes back to kind of what we said. I think it was last week's episode, the sinless mentality. They're coming at marriage, which you've already said, this a shift of perspective for marriage, but they're coming at marriage of a good marriage doesn't argue or doesn't have tension, to have a broad term, doesn't have tension. So therefore, if we have any tension, we're in a bad marriage. We can't have a bad marriage because we're Christians. And so the goal is skewed because their goal is avoid tension versus a goal being to honor and image the Lord, the gospel.
Yeah.
So sorry, I cut you
that's
off
a
there.
great point. It's like the same perspective of trying to be sinless. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That makes total sense, because that's got to be pervasive in how we think about Christianity as a whole.
Absolutely. Right. Well, and even on a I was about to say a deeper note, not on a deeper note. The gospel is the deepest, but on a psychological note, on how we're wired as well. We've talked about language before in regards to negative language versus positive language. And even on a psychological no, if we focus so much on the, oh, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, there's negative things that implied versus a do this mentality of a positive, a proactive mentality. And then knowing kind of just how humans kind of work in that, and realizing the heart behind so much of the gospels and the epistles and things written of this mentality of, hey, I'm not telling you don't do all these things. But really the heartbeat is, I'm telling you live like who you are in Jesus.
Right.
Like take this positive action. Now in regards to marriage, acknowledge the positive truth of marriage. And within that, there's going to be these negative things that fade away, but you're not focused on fighting the negative things. You're focused on the pursuit of God's intention for marriage. Yeah.
It's the same perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting in Ephesians 5 that he doesn't say, wives, make sure your husband love you as Christ loved the church, and husbands, make sure your wife submit to you as the church submits to it. So it's, I think it's funny that somehow marriage is this exclusive relationship where our expectations of the other person are high, rather than the focus being on, as a husband, my entire focus is to love my wife like Christ loved the church. And as a wife, my entire focus is to submit to my husband as to the Lord. And we could talk about what that, like if you have questions about what he means there by submit, what he doesn't mean is just do whatever the heck your husband says. That's not the idea. It's submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, like it says,
which is verse 21,
earlier, right? So it's not exclusive to a wife in that. I think the husband's included in that statement before, but I think he's specifically talking about the elevation of this relationship of marriage and how it reflects Jesus in the church, and that's why it's spoken of in that way. But it's not the expectation of the other person. Like I think that's part of the tension in relationships and marriages, is that we have such a high expectation of the other person rather than just doing what Ephesians 5 says that we are to do as a husband and as a wife.
Yeah, you had mentioned a second ago kind of personality types as well. One of the ways that the Lord has shaped me in that is while I am in kind of the peacemaker is what 9 is. What's funny is the Lord has kind of shaped me to understand that, like, even though the surface level peace may be broken, it's in the pursuit of a greater peace. And so it's kind of like the wing 8 part of me. It's like I'm okay with conflict, but also because with the conflict coming in with the goal being Christ, the goal is ultimately the truest peace, which is in Christ. And so thinking about that as well within marriage, of like, I've had hard conversations with Hannah before. We've had hard conversations just about life, not necessarily about each other, but just how are we going to parent? How are we going to handle this situation? We're butting heads a little bit right here. Let's talk about it. Let's walk through it. Most people don't even want to have the conversation. And if you think about a stereotypical 9, they would not approach that conversation. Okay, things are peaceful right now. I don't need to stir the pot.
They usually shut down and don't talk.
But because I know there's a greater peace beyond that, because I know that our marriage rests in Christ, and this doesn't have to be conflict, doesn't have to be tension, doesn't have to be these things. We can resolve it with the pursuit of Jesus, not out of our own strength, but realizing, recognizing, reminding one another and encouraging one another. Let's focus on Jesus in the midst of this. And that the tension, whatever it is, dissipates, and say tension comes back or whatever, because another thing in life happens, like you walk through it in the name of Jesus.
And you can disagree. It allows you to disagree. And that's where I think people mess up too, is like they allow the disagreement to turn into something more intense.
Well, I mean, most of the time the disagreement is not the gospel. Like it's like simple things. We're disagreeing about
parenting.
Something that is smaller than the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Where we should go to dinner. Which I've learned it's best to give choices as a husband. But when your wife's a 9, you still won't get an answer. So I just start picking.
Well, or you do what this one guy did that I saw, and I thought that was really clever. He was like, he goes, "You'll never guess where I'm taking you for dinner tonight." and
she says, she picks.
She says something. And
Chipotle?
He's like,
we're going to Chipotle.
That's exactly right.
Genius.
So, you never guess.
It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work with Enneagram 9s. It wouldn't work.
She'd be like, where?
Well, where do you want to go?
Yeah, it's exactly it. What's the best place for you?
Are you sure you want to go there, though? I wouldn't have to go there. It's exactly what it is, man.
That's genius, though.
Yeah. It's, I think we've been taught too much to put our personalities to death rather than to submit our personalities to Jesus.
That's a great way to say it.
That is a good way to say it.
And so I know about myself that if I have been around people every day for several days, I know that I'm going to be more irritable. I am not an extrovert. I don't like crowds. I don't like lines. I don't like
Nobody likes lines.
I don't like
Ooh, I get to wait.
no, but you're in a forced social
Oh,
environment.
you mean
Yeah,
there's
I know
people
what
who
you
can
mean.
talk
Yeah,
to
yeah,
people in
Yeah,
lines.
you're in a forced social environment for however long that line lasts, and there are people in front of you and behind you, and I don't like it. I don't do well around a lot of people.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
I just don't. And after a period of time, my frustration isn't. I'm frustrated. I'm not frustrated with Michelle and the boys,
You're just
but
frustrated.
but I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
And if I am not careful, I will be more on edge, and I will be more short tempered
Yeah.
when I come home. And so I don't have to say, I don't have to go, well, Ryan, you shouldn't feel that way because
Right.
you've been around people all week.
Right.
I have to take that I'm feeling and go, okay, how do I, the next 2 hours I'm helping the boys with homework, or I'm going to throw the football with the boys, or I'm going to do dinner or whatever. Like, how do I take what I'm feeling right now and submit it to Christ
Yeah.
Absolutely.
to show my family love?
Yeah.
And then Michelle and I have the kind of relationship after 16 years where when the kids get in bed and stuff, I can be like, man, I'm exhausted. Can we just, let's just watch a show tonight? Like, I can't talk anymore.
Michelle's like, no, let's go stand in line.
I heard there's a line down the street we can go stand in.
Shut up, both of you. But you know what I mean? Like, I know I have learned kind of my limits.
Yeah.
I've kind of learned,
That's it. I think what you just expressed is what I think all of the stuff I was saying is you're recognizing a potential point of tension that will potentially keep you from representing
Christ.
Jesus and the church and the relationship well. So you're, to your phrase, submitting that, if you will, to Jesus. And that sounds like a really cheesy way to say it.
It does, but
you're like, okay, let's say
to the
this way.
gospel.
You're recognizing that could be a problematic issue.
Yeah.
You're not saying this is wrong in me. What you're saying is this could produce a situation that is not good in marriage or parenting. And so my recognition of that is actually you saying, I want to represent, I want to love my wife like Christ loved the church. It's you recognizing the tipping point.
Sure.
Recognizing
what people have done in the past is they've tried to quell the frustration. You shouldn't be frustrated. There are people who thrive around other people all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them.
Right.
Like it's to the point. It gets to the point where noise, like even a noise, like starts to almost physically hurt me.
Like Dumb and Dumber.
And but it's and I know, like, I mean, I don't know if, I know we joked about it months ago that I'm on the autism spectrum.
I forgot about it.
But like, there comes a point when noises that yesterday were the same volume as they are today, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And like, I'd had a couple of exhausting days, and we were at Asher's basketball game, and they have the buzzer for the, the quarters, and it's loud anyway.
And they always forget to turn it off.
Yeah. And it was just like, and I just told Michelle, I was like, I got to go home. Like, because every time that would buzz, like, anyway, so I've learned that about myself, and I've learned to be able to communicate that to my family.
Yeah.
For the sake of the gospel, and say, listen, like, I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to go for a run,
I think it's amazing because you're actually recognizing that instead of allowing that to become something that's awkward and make marriage hard, you're recognizing.
And I don't feel the need to change those instinctual feelings in me. Like,
nope.
I need my space.
What's not wrong is that you feel that way.
Right.
What could be wrong is how you act on it.
Yeah. And so that's something that you brought up, Micah, in a conversation from years ago with me, is that like, you don't feel that frustration in and of itself is sinful. It's how are we going to handle it? And so what we do is, if you feel frustration in your marriage, the reason that Christians have so often taught you don't need to be frustrated in your marriage is because of where frustration typically lands.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is go, look, there's probably going to be times you're frustrated. How do you submit those things to the aim of the gospel?
Yeah, there you go.
And so you take this frustration, and Pierce, to your point a moment ago, you say, look, let's sacrifice our peace for a little bit so that we can take this frustration that we have and figure out how to shape this in light of the gospel.
Yeah.
And make it serve the gospel rather than serve our pleasure.
And I don't think you can do that in general, not you, Pierce, but in general, I don't think you can do that until you start to understand your tendencies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And understanding your tendencies, then through the lens of understanding who Christ has made you to be, Christ's intentions for your marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because some of your, it's possible, Ryan, that maybe frustration tendencies come from a misunderstanding of who you are in Christ.
Yeah.
So I think it could go deeper than that, but I do think it's important just to understand your natural personality tendencies.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're able to bring that to the table. Yeah. And initially, like those conversations, I don't know, maybe they're not as awkward for some people, but I know that I'll feel that tension arise in me of like, I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring it up, but it needs to be brought up. And I don't know how often people feel that. Maybe you don't feel that at all. Maybe it's from different standpoints. Maybe it's personality type for me.
I have learned how to do it differently. I think it's why it's not so awkward for me.
Yeah. And I learned recently too, because of certain tendencies I have while I knew the conversation needed to take place, I needed to get away for a second. Not like there's this huge explosive fight, but just kind of like, I just need to process. I need to process real quick. I don't need to go in this conversation without having processed, because then I usually ask a lot of questions, and then she doesn't have all the answers either. So neither one of us have processed.
That's one of the tendencies of your personality type, is that you actually typically take time to process. Like it's a necessity for you. So I
need to do that. And then I realized while I was taking time to process, like, okay, now it's becoming stewing. We need to we need to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So makes sense. I mean, there's a lot to say about marriage.
I think actually
we'll talk about it again.
I was about to say this dictates a marriage part 3, I think.
Yeah.
Sooner than 3 years down the road.
We should probably just do marriage every like 6 months or something like that.
Yeah. That sounds good. And I think that, I mean, there's always new light thrown onto marriage, just culturally standing. I mean, you counsel a lot of people, so you see a lot of things that are happening, a lot of things that have been consistent for the last however long you've been doing counseling, but also how culture may speak into that. I mean, you even started the beginning of the podcast with, okay, I didn't think I'd have to do this 3 years ago, but there's a difference between man and a woman. And so just even speaking light into how culture is perceiving certain things and how the truth of the Christ doesn't change, but it may interact with culture differently, if that makes sense. Like it might have to.
Well, because culture has changed, the truth of Christ hasn't, but application may look different.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because culture has changed, even though the truth. So like we didn't say anything new biblically necessarily today, but we're shining a greater light and maybe a little bit of a different light because of where culture is.
We're trying to say it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what we're trying to do is reduce it to its lowest common,
simplest form.
Yeah. Simpler
and realize that it really is about Jesus and not
every
certain behaviors or certain things.
And so while today it was an hour-long conversation, which in itself, people think, well, if you talk about hours specifically about something, maybe it's more complicated than not. Everything that we said was branched off of the truth of God's design and intention for marriage to image him, and how has he done that now through Christ and empowering us to take up these roles of Jesus and his church and show the light of the gospel to the world through our marriage. And therefore, because of that foundation, is stemmed into an hour-long conversation of saying, how does that play out? So the simpler form of marriage being God's intention for marriage is to image him.
Yeah.
And nowadays we understand that through the lens of the gospel, through the lens of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, as always, we are at the Garden Audio.
Woohoo!
We're with Stephen here. Go follow at the Garden Audio on Instagram. Go give him a big old howdy doody. Just tell him hello. See how it's going. I want to say something to like. I need to figure out a quote that people need to go say to like surprise him with. But howdy doody is today's. So go throw a howdy doody in the inbox of Stephen. And while you're over there, throw a howdy doody in the inbox of Simpler Pod. We're at Simpler Pod.
Make sure you put howdy before that.
Yeah.
We're not interested in your duties.
We don't want any duty howdies. We want some howdy duties. Yeah. Go follow us over there. Go see what we got going on. Subscribe, like, follow, all that fun stuff. This is a day and age. There's nobody in that one, but I'll do this one. Yeah, I'm just used to doing this.
Down the camera.
But anyway, we love you guys.
If
We're thankful for you guys.
Donate an iPhone to us.
An
old one. We'll take it for.
I could get my camera back right there, and I could look at somebody. We love you guys. We're thankful for you guys, and as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? Catch y'all in March. Bye.
Awesome.